with Martin Wolf, who'll be talking to me about the insights from this year's Davos and the geopolitical and economic impact. Then we'll analyse the effect of global conflicts on trade and economies in our panel Quantifying the Impact of Geopolitical Tensions. Then you'll see the FT Leaders interview, where I sit down with CEO of Ralph Lauren, Patrice Louvet, to discuss how you build resilience in challenging times. Finally, we'll wrap up with our panel on the resilient enterprise, where experts will discuss their insights on risk management and technology-driven growth. It's the perfect conclusion to a week of sharp discussion and bold insights. I'm Andrew Hill, and this is the Davos Daily Show, brought to you by FT Live. Welcome, and welcome back, Martin Wolf, Chief Economics Commentator of the FT and a long-time visitor to Davos. Martin, we're coming to the end of the summit and our last Davos Daily Show. There seems to be in the Davos elite a mood of, I suppose, maximum optimism from the US contingent, maximum pessimism from the European contingent. What are you picking up? What have you been picking up over the last couple of days, overshadowed by Donald Trump pulling some pretty enormous economic levers already?
Yes, I think that's very much the impression I've had. Europeans are pretty comprehensively depressed. The economy is clearly not doing well. There are some huge challenges. They're hopelessly behind on tech. I mean, this is because that's part of the euphoria of the Americans, and nobody knows what to do about it. We're divided by populist forces, which Trump's ascension is a symptom, but in Europe that tears Europe apart. It doesn't bring the country together because there isn't a country there. And meanwhile, what Trump plans to do, and it is indeed now doing, undermines the central idea of post-war Europe, which is the US is a beneficent and benevolent ally. It supports our security. It underpins the global liberal order, of which we are in Europe are a crucial part. And that's all gone. So we've got a huge internal problems. It's a huge external challenge from the country we have relied on since the war. It's a completely new world, and it's pretty scary. Meanwhile, the Americans here, business people, I think they're being pretty naive, but we'll see, think that Trump will get rid of all the regulations that have ever oppressed them. They can forget about all this climate stuff, the woke stuff, diversity, equity, inclusion. What was that? They can get back to what real men do, which is make lots and lots of money and become unimaginably rich. And they see that in this world too, the US is ascendant, the economy is strong, it's leading in the new technologies. It's absolutely wonderful.
So what's the riskiest part, would you say, of the Trump program? Is it tariffs? Is it that kind of obsession with tariffs? Or is it actually the combination, as you've written in a rather excellent column this week, of the combination of risks that will accumulate across the whole range of economic levers?
Well, first of all, I think it's very important to recognize this is a new sort of program. It's a little like Trump 1, but this is very radical stuff we're seeing. And so how far he will go, how he will settle, what sort of deals he wants to get at the end of this, how people will react, how much retaliation there will be. This is really now very unpredictable territory. We have a very impulsive person who feels absolutely vindicated and invincible. And history suggests people who feel like that, people who think they can march on Russia, as it were, find things go wrong. So that's the general point. And we don't know how this will work. I mean, my own sense is this may be a bit naive. The tariff war will probably hurt the rest of the world more than the United States. That's not conventional economics. Conventional economics would certainly tell you that you, in the first place, bear the cost, and there will be costs for America. There are no net benefits here, but there are some very vulnerable countries that can be hit here. I think for Europe, it's not colossally damaged, but for Canada and Mexico, this is going to be very, very costly. So there's no doubt about that. But I think the really big concern is sort of the mixture of these macro and micro forces through the US economy. And the one way of thinking about it is, contrary to what they say, the US economy has performed very, very strongly. It's basically at full employment. It still has quiescent, but definitely some inflationary pressure. It's running a colossal fiscal deficit for a country which is at full employment. About 6% of GDP is forecast. Its debt is exploding. The financial markets are at euphoria levels, even more so in some ways now. And he is proposing a program which continues the tax cuts, allows a lot of deregulation, particularly of finance, is almost bound to increase inflationary pressure, particularly all those tariffs which are stopping trade coming in. So the likelihood is that there could be very serious macroeconomic disturbances coming from the United States. I mean, I would remind you that the George W. Bush administration started off with lots of deregulation and a war which generated lots of demand. They ended up with a colossal financial crisis. So I would say there are tremendous risks in the US, and almost inevitably, if things go wrong there, it will filter over or even swamp over the rest of the world.
Is there a narrow path to economic success for this program? What is it, if so?
It's going to be very interesting to see whether Scott Bessent, who people say, I've never met him, is a relatively sensible person.
New Treasury Secretary.
He's going to be the new Treasury Secretary, must be the most important job, can to keep this on the straight and narrow. I think the crucial thing is they don't allow the financial deregulation to go crazy, that they remember there are such things as huge financial crises, that in the end, the fiscal position is managed. I don't think it's going to be through huge spending cuts. If you look at the arithmetic, that doesn't seem plausible. So they have to be pretty cautious in the end about what they do on fiscal policy, not allowing overheating. They must avoid, I think, a real war between the president and the Fed, which could happen in the scenario I've just counted, which I think would disturb Wall Street a lot. So that's kept calm. The tariff wars, which could lead to cycles of retaliation, very disruptive, have to be contained. He must avoid wars. That's pretty important. And then things might work quite well because it's clear, whatever else, that the underlying dynamic of the US economy, the AI revolution included, could generate quite significant productivity growth over the next few years. I've been in the most interesting sessions I've been in. I've been discussing AI, and there's something pretty big happening here. And so, if they are sensible, calm, cool, collected, don't really try and disrupt the whole world, and just let the economy work, there will be huge gains. Whether this will satisfy Trump's base, they will feel that this is really the red meat of MAGA, I don't know. But yes, the US could work. It's obviously very, very foolish, if we know anything as economists, to bet against the US. I mean, it is basically a fortress. It has huge resources. He's mentioned oil as the wonderful baby drill sort of thing. Not good for the climate, but it's huge resources. It's essentially a fortress. And it has this immense productivity machine.
There's a little bit of envy going on from the European CEOs that I've been speaking to about this unleashing, the deregulation. At the same time, we had Beata Javorcik from the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development on Tuesday, talking about how this is a now or never moment for Europe. Christine Lagarde, the ECB president, yesterday on a panel in the main summit, saying it's an existential moment for Europe. Could Europe be shocked into doing something collectively to actually match, or at least take this opportunity to take a different growth path?
I think that is a huge question, and as a European, first of all, I feel that, but also we in Britain are still in Europe. Yeah. This is pretty important, and I think there are multiple existential challenges coming together. There's what's happened to the US, which we've discussed. Fundamental change, therefore, in our security environment. A huge challenge with this revolution in technology of which the Europeans are not a part at all. That's terrifying. Must be, because long-run growth is based on innovation, and we're not there. Europe is fragmented, 27 countries, and there are others outside, so even more. Doing things together is very, very hard. There are very profound instincts towards regulation. That's part of the way Europe runs. And Europe has been told, and Trump really reminds us, that you've got to change a lot, really a lot, to make a difference. I would very much like to believe that all these challenges will concentrate the mind. The difficulty here is ultimately every decision maker here is a national decision maker. I mean, Ursula von der Leyen doesn't decide what's going to happen. It's going to be the governments in Germany and France, the new government in Germany, that will decide. And they always will look at their national interests.
Yes.
And there isn't anybody there who decides for Europe. And so I fear that they will just end up in endless squabbling about who does what first. So I am very anxious that Europe will fail to respond, and Europe will become the last bastion of traditional liberal democracy. And if it fails, then we are in serious trouble.
Right. How about China? We haven't really talked about China. Clearly, that's the other big player here that probably has more of a chance of promoting a unified rivalry to the US vision.
Yes, I mean, it is the only other superpower. I think what I get out of the discussions, I'm visiting China soon, but I haven't been there for a while, is technologically, I mean, in terms of innovation in tech, for instance, they're really pretty impressive. Yeah. I mean, they came from nowhere, and in one industry after another, they're really quite serious. Of course, they're behind the US, but think, 30 years ago, they were nothing economically. So this is pretty staggering. They have clearly increased the centralization of the regime and its control over the economy, which I think is a big mistake. They have serious macroeconomic problems in sustaining growth, sustaining demand, and there's a confidence problem in the business community. I think that's pretty clear. So I would say that there's both huge potential and real problems. And I think the future of China and whether it will get back to a really stable high growth performance, or whether it's actually moving to really 4% growth, 3-4% growth, which would still be a bit faster in the US, but not really a catch-up performance. So I think the future of China is one of the most interesting questions in the world. I don't see it as Japan in 1990, but I don't know how dynamic it's going to be.
Right, and of course a huge, as we're going to discuss in the next panel after this, huge geopolitical question of how they respond to US over-dominance or attempt to dominate.
They may, of course, it may end up as an actual head-on conflict. The one thing I like about Trump is he doesn't seem to like wars, and I don't think wars are very good, so we should try and avoid them, particularly between nuclear powers. So that's good. But yes, of course, China in its own way faces a huge challenge. And how that will play out, its relation with Russia, we haven't discussed that, but Russia remains a very important strategic player in all this. We're in real great power politics again. The US isn't going to dominate the whole world, but what Trump is the absolute classic bull in a china shop, and China will have to decide what to do about that.
Yes. Let me ask one final question. You're a regular visitor to Davos, as I said at the beginning. When we had Gideon, another regular Davos goer, on at the first program on Tuesday, he said that Trump's inauguration sounds the death knell for Davos. Do you agree?
Well, sort of yes and no. I'm going to be judicious, rarely so. It seems to me it is likely, not certain, despite everything that he's doing, that the world economy will remain fairly highly integrated. We will still have, in many ways, a global economy, or at least a lot of global economy. Just think the tech revolution is inherently sort of global, because it's not like you can't put tariffs on this stuff. Yeah. You can't put tariffs on AI. You can do what the Chinese have done, the firewalls, but that's really hard. Part of Europe's problems. How do you protect yourself against OpenAI, for example? You can't. So there's going to be a global economy because technology has guaranteed that. The cost of transport and communications is so low, the world economy is very open, so business have to talk to one another because that's what it means. Sure. And the great thing about Davos is it's a network, it's a meeting, and they will continue to have global interests because American business is global. It's not going to stop being global just because of Donald Trump. And similarly, European business, by definition, like Japan, these are countries that have to be global. So I think that will survive very strongly. It might even strengthen. It'll be change. We haven't talked, lots of Indians here.
Yes. Yeah.
And India's quite a big place, and it has huge potential, and they're interested in the world now. So that will all continue. It's uniquely valuable. Davos was also an ideology. How deep that really was, I don't know. But it was sort of about progressive, socially aware, globally responsible, environmentally responsible capitalism.
That looks a bit more challenged.
And that doesn't look very healthy anymore.
Yes.
And so the ideology bit sort of looks a bit outdated. I like it, but it looks out of date. Well, it's sort of FT-ish, isn't it? But that may seem irrelevant. But the core thing of Davos is it's a network, and the network will survive.
Well, we look forward to seeing you here again next year and in the years after when it does survive. And thank you again, Martin Wolf, for joining us. Stay with us for further discussion of the geopolitics in the live panel that now follows. Stay tuned. So in just a few hours, Donald Trump is going to address the World Economic Forum. The gossip has been alive since the inauguration, more or less, that he might suddenly pull some enormous coup de théâtre and arrive in person. There's no evidence that that's going to happen. He will be joining the summit by a video link. But there's no doubt that he has dominated the discussions and his actions have, as Martin was just explaining, been extremely consequential already for a number of people here. So I'm joined now by a panel to discuss the geopolitical implications, not just of Trump, but also some of the other areas in which geopolitiks remains a disruptor. We have with us David Schwimmer, CEO of LSEG, the Markets, Data and Exchanges Group, Nari Woods, founding dean of the Blavatnik School of Government, and from McKinsey, Ashutosh Paddy, to talk us through some of this. I want to start, Nari, with you and pick up on what Martin said about us being back in an area of real great power politics. What do you think that means for the world? Small question.
I think it's competition for territory, resources, trade routes, natural resources. It's competition over the technology of the time, whether it was the Industrial Revolution or today, AI technologies. And it's competition for who controls the rules of the game and what counts as legitimate, whether it's empire or Cold War or a new competition today. And it's an important reference he's making because it means we have to dig well before the end of the Cold War to think about models of cooperation and competition. The famous treaties of the 19th century and the coming together of great powers to effect a much more rudimentary order than the rules-based order that most of us all grew up in.
Right. I mean, you didn't want me to mention this, but this time last year in this place, I asked who was going to win the election, Trump and Biden, at that stage in the campaign, and you were the only one to actually say Trump. So we have had a while to prepare for this. It's 2 months since the election itself. Has anything actually changed this week in terms of great power politics, do you think?
Well, so what's been really interesting to me at Davos this week is that there's a very optimistic discussion going on about the possibilities of growth. Yes, as Martin said, Europe's a bit depressed, but there is still a clinging to the idea if we can just get some moderate growth and some increases in productivity, It will restore stability and calm, and we'll be able to get back to the rules-based order. I think Martin said calm, collected decision-making. But that worldview is now pitted against some really powerful forces of disruption. The two that are currently being debated are Trump and AI. But if we go below that and we think 10 years ago, the dark forces of globalization, terrorism, global crime, global criminal financing, disruptive political movements working underground, could be controlled by governments. Terrorist financing could be tracked. Information and misinformation could be tracked. Intelligence services could do their job. There were norms about non-political interference. That world is gone. We have an American administration that wants to open the spigots of crypto, which means, and what we've heard this week from Europol, Interpol, et cetera, from the security, is that crypto is a huge accelerant and amplifier of global crime and those dark forces of globalization. It's political interference has now become something that, some in the tech sector in the United States brazenly engage in. We will fund the AfD in Germany, a hugely disruptive party defined by Germany's own security forces as a real threat to their order. So really big disruptive forces that are more and more highly organized. And so that in that world, it's really hard to see this orderly progression of moderate economic growth, increases in productivity, calming politics. It feels like a real struggle within countries. And that struggle within countries will always reverberate internationally, because the easiest thing for a leader, whether it's the President of the United States or the President of China to do if their population are in tumult, is to launch attacks on another country, to unify the country, to give it nationalist purpose. So it makes for a rather
mixture.
Heady mixture, yeah.
Yes. David, let me turn to you. LSEG is almost literally plumbed into the international system, not just through things like the London Stock Exchange, but even more so through the data business that you're running. How do you deal with this level of disruption that you're seeing geopolitically?
So the juxtaposition of everyone meeting here for this week and the U.S. inauguration has been dramatic and has created this notion that enormous change is afoot. And I think there is significant change afoot. But it's important to remember that we have, in the business community, had an enormous amount of disruption going back the last 5-10 years. And there has been, we don't need to run through the various events, the pandemic, amongst other things, wars, et cetera. And there have been questions about global supply chains, trade, relations, et cetera. The volume has been turned up on that dramatically by the second Trump administration. But these are a lot of issues that businesses have had to deal with for the last several years. And I think you have seen a number of reactions already. You have seen companies that are more focused on supply chains, more focused on whom they are interacting with, resilience issues, et cetera. Doesn't mean that the world is prepared. It doesn't mean there's not more disruption coming. But I think this is something where businesses have learned over the last several years that they have to adapt. There has been a lot more focus on risk management. There have been a lot of issues that get much more attention now, including geopolitics, including other issues like cybersecurity, including supply chain security. So, as I said, I think the dial feels as if it has just been turned up, but these are a lot of issues that the business community has been very focused on for the last several years.
Right, and to Martin's point in the interview we just heard, there does seem to be this divergence between European-based CEOs and US-based CEOs in thinking about Trump and the opportunities that it provides, particularly for the US businesses. To some degree, you straddle both. What are you hearing? How are you interpreting that kind of pessimism, optimism spectrum?
It's very interesting. Our biggest market is the US.
Yeah.
We are regulated by all the big financial regulators in the US. So we're directly involved in and engaging in this conversation on both sides of the Atlantic as well as on a global basis. I tend to be a little bit wary of how extreme the exuberance has gotten about the US. And I am I'm intrigued by the current narrative around Europe. Europe has to work through a number of issues, whether it's regulatory, whether it's the notion of the animal spirits, and there's no reason that capital has to flow into Europe. In other words, there's no deserving element of this. But to the nature of the dialogue that has taken place here, maybe it acts as more of a catalyst. I was at an event in Paris in December with a bunch of CEOs talking about the Draghi report. And I asked the group, okay, over the next 5 years, how many of you think that some of the recommendations of the Draghi report will be implemented? No one raised their hand. No, that's an element of some of the cynicism or skepticism about the ability of Europe to address some of these challenges. So the question I have after a lot of the discussion this week, Martin's comments, you see a lot of it in the media as well, has the narrative around Europe gotten severe enough, and has the reaction to the shifting winds in the US gotten severe enough for us to see that kind of real change in Europe? You're seeing some of this from the UK government, a lot of what the Chancellor's been talking about with respect to regulation.
She's been here, of course.
And driving change in a number of other areas, such as planning. So it'll be interesting to see if we see more of that in some of the other countries as well. And that could lead to more of a shift in the winds.
Right. Asatosh, turning to you with a similar question. You've obviously got ears to the ground with a lot of clients and CEOs and businesses around the world. I talked to some of your colleagues. Some of your colleagues have been on the show, and others I talked to on Monday. The idea seems to be emerging that, okay, there's going to be a volatile time, but for businesses that provides opportunity. You've got the opportunity there to do something in this disruptive space. On the other hand, uncertainty is traditionally very bad for business. So what are you hearing about how businesses are coping with the geopolitics? Is it a free-for-all now? Let's just grab the opportunity while we've got it.
Andrew, I would say this is not just this week, but over the past 6 months, geopolitics has become a top 3 CEO and board priority. And this is consistently true not just for companies in Europe, but also for companies in the United States. I was in discussions with the CEO of an industrial technology company, and we asked the question, how much of your value creation thesis is really linked to geopolitics? And as we worked through that question together, the answer was as high as 50 to 70%. And the complicated factor around geopolitics is the fact that often CEOs don't have one person in the organization who really owns that agenda item. It is different than a supply chain. It impacts every aspect of what companies will need to address, whether it is supply chains, whether it is IT, whether it is future investments, whether it's market growth strategies, and so on. So back to your question, one of the important reframes that we're trying to highlight is it's not just about scenario planning and protecting for the downside, but it is truly linked to value creation and saying, how do you use this moment to reposition the company for a fundamentally different future?
So is this the exception that proves the rule that you probably shouldn't tinker with strategy, on the go? I mean, is this one of these shifts where you say, okay, listen, we really do have to now think. We've got tariffs coming. We've got these new tensions. If you've got business in Canada or Mexico, I was hearing from another big industrial company with maquiladoras in Mexico, worrying about what's going to happen. Is this one of these big, we need to move the big levers on strategy now?
We've been telling every CEO and board that if you developed your strategic plan more than 6 months ago, it's probably time to go back and pressure test every single aspect of it.
Yeah.
Just to make sure that you've not overlooked, because the world has changed. There's a set of assumptions around what probably went into the plan that are likely to be quite different. And the second thing we're saying is having a model in place so you can be agile and continuously, there's a lot of uncertainties, right? Things that we don't know about. And I think some of this will play out over time. So having the flexibility to be able to adapt over time also becomes an important aspect of the strategy.
Yes. I mean, Nari, I wanted to come back to you on this. I mean, how much do you think has actually changed already? And indeed, how much has stayed the same? If a business leader comes to you, which they doubtless do occasionally, and wants to know, should I shift everything for a new Trump era? Is it too late? Should they already have been doing that? I mean, I'm just wondering how much is staying the same here.
Yeah. So I don't think it's about do you shift everything, but do you rethink the premises on which your strategy is based?
Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's not just business. You know, I think it's very difficult for people in government, the civil servants, the politicians, to change their frame. They've had 30 years of what they keep referring to as a rules-based system. That rules-based system is a kind of aspiration now, right? And where we are thoroughly in a disruptive decade. And that means that governments are going to have to think much more boldly, and business is going to have to think boldly with them. You know, on crypto, for example, yes, you can make lots of money with crypto, but are you literally building a system that breaks all of order and creates chaos, or that significantly threatens it? Dario Amodei this morning on the main stage in Davos put the thought that when it comes to politics, AI, there is a risk that AI strengthens and stabilizes dictatorships and destabilizes democracy. And his challenge was to all of us to think about that and to think about how do you deploy AI so that it doesn't do that.
Yes, but as you've already said, AI, of course, is one of the chips that these great powers are moving around to some extent. So,
and that's the problem.
They could use it as a weapon.
Right, because at the moment there's two different logics. One is the US and China have to compete full out, zero regulation, zero restraint, to see who's the first to get to AGI or superintelligence, because the winner will be able to take all. The other paradigm, which both Chinese computer scientists and American computer scientists are worried about, which is that you don't do that. You need to be thinking at each step, what will it do to the system itself? And which doesn't mean stop everything. It means be very careful about the difference between tool AI and AGI, and think very carefully about what global rules should surround AGI and the technologists should sign up to.
Right. I mean, David, to come to you, obviously a data business, AI must be fundamental to some of the things that you're planning. But setting this in the geopolitical context, are you concerned, for example, that Europe may lag behind? The big tech is, there next to the president in the Silicon Valley. Obviously, there's a lot happening which is developing very fast. Does that shift the way in which you have to think? The sort of politics of AI is shifting the way you think about using it?
So there's one big issue that we do think a lot about, and that in the context of trade barriers, much of the discussion is around manufactured goods, or in some cases, agricultural products, but chips, autos, et cetera. A big area that doesn't get a lot of attention, but is incredibly important, especially in the context of AI, is data flows. And we have seen, prior to this past recent explosion of discussion around tariffs associated with the Trump administration, is increasing amounts of data localization requirements.
Right.
And we have seen that from a number of countries, whether China, India, France. And data localization meaning that the data has to be stored and processed in the country in which it is collected. That's a big issue in terms of economic growth. When you think about how much of a driver data flows are, digital trade is. And again, it doesn't get that much attention. There are some countries that are involved in trying to address it. Japan has been playing a leading role in trying to push a concept of what's called data free flows with trust. Singapore and the UK have a digital agreement. The UK and the US have a data bridge. So there are some attempts to address this. But if we go down a path with respect to data that is comparable to what has been suggested with respect to manufactured goods, that could have a serious impact on global growth.
Right. And Ashutosh, I mean, broadening that, we think of data as being intangible, obviously, but it is data centers, which are huge investments, energy critical investments, often with pulling in a lot of power. They are long-term investments. Some of these big decisions about where to put stuff are going to be affected by the outcomes of these geopolitical conflicts. Is that something that's worrying your clients?
Yeah, I think, Andrew, if I pull back up, my conversation, a lot of our conversation with clients is on technology is maybe this is the time to try and do what has not been possible in the last 20 years of technology deployment, which is actually to create value from technology, right? The ugly truth is when you talk to CEOs and you ask the question, right, how many of you have made significant investments in technology, everybody raises their hand. And you then say, if you've created value from technology, keep your hand up, and 90% of the hands go down, right? So in many ways, it is actually not about the technology. It is about the rewiring of technology into the core products, into the core processes, and that has been the challenge that has come in the way. With the use of AI, back to data centers, there will be quite an explosion in terms of the requirement, like energy demand, for example, electricity demand. Historically, I'll take the US lens for a second, has been growing at 2 to 3% a year. It goes up by an extra couple of points, and that's actually a massive shift just in the US alone. And you think about, you take that around the world. And yes, I think that the need for data centers, there's a set of like really important strategic issues to be solved there. And I think it goes beyond location, which is obviously an aspect of it, but into everything else, like how much of this, what's the relationship with the grids? Can the grids keep up? What is going to be the mix of power? How much is going to be, for example, do you have to start to rely on fuel cells as an example, right? I think this idea that you need the discussion nuclear. I think there's going to be a number of strategic issues which get catalyzed by technology, and I think the choices have to be informed by geopolitics.
Right. Nari, let me broaden this to some other parts of the world. I mean, China is the obvious one that kind of looms large in the geopolitical discussion. That China-US relationship is critical. Any increase in the tensions between China and the US could have repercussions for people who've localized or located their supply chain sourcing from the likes of Taiwan. There's all sorts of things in the mix there. Do you have a view about where that relationship might go? Is it as unpredictable as I've heard some people say, as Donald Trump might just as easily head over, shake hands with Xi Jinping and say, we've done a deal and we've opened up trade and tariffs are off the table? I mean, that's
so there's a raw politics to all of these issues now. Even 6 months ago, countries were saying we don't want to have to choose between being part of the China alliance or the American alliance, right? Unconditionally in one camp or another, because most countries in the world depend on both. But now, in the last 48 hours, the calculus has become different. For countries asking, where are our vulnerabilities? The two countries that President Trump signed a trade agreement with, Canada and Mexico, overnight he's imposed tariffs on.
Yeah.
So that puts the whole system in question because,
I mean, they're
because
close
if you think about it, where you put your data in the comfortable world of a rules-based order, it would have been unthinkable that you would question whether this would be turned off or used against you. That's all up for grabs now. And so I think the localization issue, where the economics is, the old economics of global supply chains, do what you can, where it's cheapest and most efficient, is gone. It's now think about the politics of where you do it. And I think the Canada-Mexico disruption, the application of these tariffs on America's closest neighbors, allies, and trade agreement partners puts a shiver of uncertainty through every economy's relationships with the United States. And that will affect the technology sector. And I don't think the technology sector, who are clustering around Mar-a-Lago, quite understand the extent to which they rely on an undisrupted rules-based order.
Yes, I mean, I suppose, David, we might find, and there was a lot of talk yesterday about this Stargate deal that seems to have annoyed Elon Musk, who for once in the last couple of weeks or couple of months finds himself on the wrong side of a deal that Donald Trump is doing. Stargate deal for new AI infrastructure. There's a chance that the tech companies decide, we've got to have a bit more influence here. Traditionally, from where you sit, do you find that relationships with the political world are strong enough to have that kind of discussion? I mean, again, to Nari's point, a lot of relationships were built on the basis of rules-based order. We have these ways of talking to the politicians, and now they seem to be shattered into, let's get down to Mar-a-Lago and shake hands here.
So the model does seem to have shifted or been broken, depending on how you think about it. I think for those of us running businesses, we always have to work with the governments that are running the countries that we operate in. LSEG's, we've been around 300 years. We worked with a lot of different kinds of governments. I think there are some real questions being raised as to how the transactional nature and how Trump approaches the kind of interaction with these companies, and then how these companies are approaching their interaction with him. Is that shifting the model in the US in some potentially very serious ways? Rule of law is a really important question and pretty fundamental to how the US economy has been operating and been growing. Questions of proximity, favoritism, et cetera. We'll see how all of that plays out. I think there's also a broader question or a broader comment, if I may. If you look at the US over the last, I'll say 20 years, but it could be longer, there has been a sort of pendulum theory of US politics. And we saw that from Trump to Biden. I think a lot of the discussion that's taking place now positions the second Trump administration as a fundamental shift, a fundamental break with the models that we have seen in the past. That may be true. I don't know, but I also would inject the possibility that you could see the pendulum shift back again in another 4 years and have a return to a more traditional approach coming out of a US president.
Right.
I put that out there as a question as opposed to a prediction.
Well, that might be good news, Ashutosh, for you and McKinsey and other consultants, because the people are going to want advice about how to deal with that. But if you've, just to take a really big example, if you've been in the Paris Agreement, then out, then back in again, now out again, I mean, how does a business even plan for that level of 4-yearly shift? That's a massive lack of certainty, isn't it?
Yeah, I think Andrew, these are like massively complicated and multi-year topics, right? If you look at energy transition and the role that every company is playing, I think there's different dimensions to that. There's an aspect of political will and regulations, and I think how that changes over time. I think the thing that gives us, I think the directionality that most companies are looking for is the rate and pace of technology evolution on energy transition. And if you look at climate technologies, I think there's been a tremendous amount of investment that has gone in, and that continues to progress at a rate and pace that is actually much faster than what most companies had expected. So there is very well the chance that I think that the rate and that what might surprise us here is the rate at which technology develops and innovation in terms of the path forward here. But I think this is part of the multi-dimensional picture that I think most CEOs will now need to consider.
Nari, do you want to pick up on that?
Well, yeah, I think what undergirding this, what politics has to solve is the ability of countries to come to agreements with each other so that everything isn't up for grabs all the time. Because without that, business can't do business. And that's what we mean when we talk about a rules-based order, right? This idea of pacta sunt servanda, a country undertakes treaty obligations to another, regardless of which government is in power. Now, the problem when an elected government personalizes that power and says, I will uphold these obligations if I feel like it, but not if I don't, is it puts democracies as a huge disadvantage. Because in an autocracy where the same ruler is in power for 40 years, people, companies, other countries can come to an agreement with that ruler knowing that he's or she is going to be in power for 40 years. Fine. But if you're doing business with a democracy where there's an alternation of power every 4 or 5 years, and there is no concept that no matter which government, the country upholds its obligations, once you break that, it makes it really difficult for business. It makes it really difficult for other countries.
What do we think, Nari, is going to happen with the conflicts of the world. We've got Gaza in a ceasefire. We've got Ukraine still rumbling on. What's your view about that aspect of the geopolitical outlook?
Well, so we have two superpowers in China and the United States who do not benefit from these conflicts. And I mean, there are some political issues, obviously, around Israel, Gaza, and the United States, but there's not, when it comes to these great power competitive drivers, they don't benefit from them. And I think there is a possibility of a deal with China. A lot of people are saying that. A Chinese leader put it to me this way. He said, with Biden, we felt we were facing many wolves, a pack of wolves. With Trump, it's one wolf. And so we feel we can do a deal. We can, because we know what we're dealing with. And you know, that could be the silver lining in this unconventional approach to foreign policy, is that we might see some deals done, some unconventional deals done, which open up new possibilities, because it doesn't feel like we've made much progress till now.
Sure. We've got about a minute left. I'd be interested to hear, David, whether you think, to the point that I was raising with Martin, whether we're likely to see some evolution of the way Davos itself works, the World Economic Forum. What do you make of that?
So I think Martin hit on the right issue, which there are aspects of Davos where it's about people meeting with each other and that kind of convening. I think that's still important, whether it happens at Davos or anywhere else. I think the ideology of Davos does feel as if there has been a pretty significant shift in terms of the notion that the global capitalist leadership can save the world, including environment, et cetera. And so it will be interesting to see how that ideology, if you want to call it that, persists. But I think the value in terms of political leaders, economic leaders, business leaders, academics getting together and talking about a lot of these issues continues to be very, very valuable.
Sure. Well, we're out of time, I'm afraid, but I want to thank Ashutosh, Nari, and David for giving us that overview. Please stick with us for our next segment, in which we'll be talking, or I have been talking to the Chief Executive of Ralph Lauren about some of these geopolitical and indeed business resilience issues, and then our live panel about how to deal with the issues that we've raised in the last 30 minutes. Thank you all.
Tech has limitless potential, but how do we turn that into value? Unlock the power of AI at scale, reinvent tech delivery, build innovative products, and entirely new businesses. We rewire organizations to get the most out of tech. From strategy and talent to operating model, data and governance, capabilities, and culture. Great tech is essential, but with McKinsey, it's never just tech.
So a warm welcome to Patrice Louvet from Ralph Lauren, CEO of Ralph Lauren since 2017.
That's right. Thank you for having me, Andrew.
Thank you for coming. Well, as we've already had a few days of Davos, and so you will know, as so often, geopolitics has kind of dominated a lot of the agenda, even the agenda that was set months ago, the inauguration of Donald Trump, clearly, and a lot of the fallout from there. I'm just interested to know how far luxury as a sector, and Ralph Lauren specifically, is resistant to these geopolitical trends.
Well, I don't know that you can generalize, but I think companies that have a clear point of view, a clear set of values, a diversified set of growth drivers generally are able to navigate very differing geopolitical environments. There are a number of those in the luxury industry. Ralph Lauren, I believe, belongs to that group. You know, we've been around for 57 years. We've gone through many geopolitical dynamics and administrations. And I think it's the clarity of what we stand for, the staying true to the values that really we care deeply about, the purpose of this company, which is to inspire the dream of a better life through authenticity and timeless style. And then just making sure that we execute with consistent excellence and importantly, agility through all this. That was tested during COVID.
Right.
Just the ability to adapt and adjust.
So what excites you about the new administration and what worries you? Or does timelessness get you through this so you can adopt a Zen approach to whoever is in the White House?
Yeah, to some extent it's the latter, Andrew, which is, again, we've been around for some time. We've been able to navigate very different situations. Listen, what I'm encouraged by and hopeful for is that we see increased consumer optimism and hope in the U.S. and therefore more engagement with the luxury category in particular. So hopefully that will play out. Obviously, what's on our radar screen is the dynamic on tariffs, right? And understanding how this will ultimately land. Our teams over the past few years have really put the emphasis on diversification of our sourcing.
Sure, you've substantially reduced your China exposure, I think.
Dramatically, yes. It was more than 50% of our business, and we've come to the conclusion that we honestly can't have one specific market be disproportionate in terms of sourcing. It's just not a good way to run a business when you need to be nimble and agile. That served us very well during COVID. So we've had a combination of diversifying, markets across Asia, but also nearshoring, which just helps supply, the European market, the North American market. So we will see ultimately what comes out of it, but I'm confident we can continue to run our play effectively and have the agility to navigate whatever the situation ends up being.
So China tariffs specifically, not so much of a worry, but the volatility and uncertainty presumably is something like all business people you're going to worry about not having certainty.
Exactly, and I think that's why for us what's critical is what we can control is how we engage with the consumer, how the brand shows up. So honestly, my team and I and Ralph's focus is on the consumer, understanding where he or she is at, what's going through their minds, and making sure we're showcasing the brand in an engaging way. We're providing them with unique experiences. We're getting them excited about the different partnerships we have out there, and not get too distracted by what we're hearing, what may be noise, but stay focused on what we can control and stay focused on our game plan. And, we've been through many administrations. We've been through COVID, and the company has continued to thrive through those environments.
But this administration specifically, what does Ralph Lauren stand for as far as I can see? It's a version of the American dream. It's Ralph's vision of the American dream.
Right.
But possibly the American dream is changing. The fact of electing Donald Trump with all that entails in terms of the way in which he's going to disrupt what's gone before, does that not potentially mean that you have to start thinking a little bit about, do we adjust our own window of what constitutes the dream for most Americans?
No, because honestly, what I think has served this company well is its consistency and the timelessness of its proposition, and the fact that consumers know what we stand for, know what we represent. And I think for us, as you look at Ralph's original definition of the American dream, that hasn't changed, nor do I expect that to change. The values of optimism, entrepreneurialism, family, dreaming and coming in, his family story, right? Coming in with nothing, and he didn't even go to fashion school, and look at what he's been able to build. That, I think, remains timeless, irrespective of the specific moment we might be in. And so we'll continue to focus on that.
So you'd be more than happy, presumably, to see the members of the administration wearing Ralph Lauren about town.
We love it when people get excited about our brand.
Right. Sticking with the idea of timelessness, obviously luxury has had a hard time, but particularly because of China not being as exciting a market latterly. There's also obviously always the vagaries of fashion. That seems to be something that you've managed to ride through. Why is that? Again, you've got this timelessness, but you're not chasing fashion, but you are reacting to fashion trends. You need to do that.
First, it's a combination of factors. So the China market is a very interesting one because our business has done particularly well in China. And I remain very optimistic about the opportunities that we have both mid and long term in that market. I think what characterizes Ralph Lauren, and first and foremost, we're not a fashion company, right? As I think about Ralph's approach, actually, I think of him more as a movie director than I do a designer, Ralph doesn't sew, he doesn't cut. I told you he didn't go to fashion school, right? He operates more like Steven Spielberg or Martin Scorsese. He has this ability to imagine these worlds, create these environments, and then we invite consumers as the actors into these worlds, and our products are the prop, basically.
Right.
I think that has been kind of the through line, and we avoid chasing trends, chasing fads. Actually, there's a quote that I'm going to butcher from him that basically says, I really don't like fashion because I don't like trends, all right? And we don't want to be trendy, we want to be timeless. So the challenge for us is how do we make sure the proposition is consistent with the philosophy of the company? And he and I have lunch when we don't travel every week, and one of the questions that consistently comes up is, are we staying true to who we are? And at the same time, making sure it's fresh and relevant to the next generation. And we put a lot of work over the past few years on making sure we're engaging that next generation, whether that's engaging on the platforms that are relevant to them, and obviously social media has played a key role here, being associated with special events that really talk to that younger generation. We're in gaming, we sponsor 2 of the best League of Legends teams. We've got partnerships with Roblox and Fortnite. And I think we really try to avoid jumping on this trend, jumping on this fad, but straight true to who we are and do it in a way that's fresh.
Right. I mean, what's an area where you've suddenly thought this looks like a bit of a threat to our brand? We need to kind of adapt here. I mean, obviously generational change happens, but you might almost say that the gulf between Ralph Lauren's generation, his generation,
yes,
the founder's generation, and the younger generation is probably wider now with digital and technology and gaming and so on than it ever has been. That's a hard gap to bridge.
It is, you're right. At the same time, what is unique about this brand is it appeals to a broad range of generations, right? We engage with newborns, and people love to gift Ralph Lauren for newborns. And then we have the silent generation that's also engaging with the brand. I think what's been interesting for us is, if you look at our core products, they appeal to all generations. So white polo shirt, 2-year-old, 10-year-old, 20-year-old, 50-year-old, 80-year-old, same white polo shirt. We'll style it differently, right? And this is where I think you come to your specific question, which is understanding the consumer, what's relevant for him or her, and how do we present our products, present our stories in the platforms that connect with them and in a way that's relevant. But we're not running away from the other generations. Right? The key is to continue to recruit new consumers because that's the lifeblood for us in the future. But we love our 85-year-old consumer, right? We love our 60-year-old consumer, and many of them love us back.
Right. You mentioned your regular lunches with Ralph himself, and obviously your predecessor left after 2 years because of creative differences with him. How have you managed to nurture that relationship? What makes it work between you and him, do you think?
So I'm very grateful for that partnership and to have the opportunity to actually spend time with Ralph. It's pretty special to be able to connect with such an iconic leader like that. Before I took the job, knowing what happened before me, he and I spent a lot of time on our vision for the company and understanding each other's values, just to make sure we were aligned on where we wanted to take the Ralph Lauren company and what really mattered to us. And I think that provided us with an amazing foundation, which has served us well over the past almost 8 years. And then we have regular discussions. What's very interesting is we never codify the relative responsibilities, right? You do this, I do that. It's been very organic, and ultimately we want this firm to be successful. It's all about Ralph Lauren. I'm really clear on the name on the door. Ralph will regularly ask me, Patrice, are you happy? Right. So we have a relationship that I think is going beyond just a professional relationship, and
right.
It's serving us well.
And I hesitate to ask this because obviously long live Ralph Lauren, but is there a post-Ralph plan?
There has to be a post-Ralph plan, right? Ralph would be the first one to say there needs to be a post-Ralph plan.
Right. What is it?
So well, I can't reveal all the secrets in this interview, Andrew, but there's a post-Ralph plan on 2 fronts, right? Ralph is both the chairman of the board and he's the chief creative officer. And with the board, there's a plan on the chairman position. And then we have an amazing team of senior designers inside the company who have been coached and trained by Ralph over the years, some of which have been with us for 30 plus years. Others are relatively new additions to the team. And so we're well positioned when Ralph decides it's time to retire to keep driving the company forward. Again, I think we're really clear on what we stand for, so I feel very good about what the future looks like from that standpoint. And it'll be up to the team to make sure we're keeping it fresh and relevant.
Right. I want to come back a little bit to the new US president. He's obviously set the tone for a rolling back of a lot of diversity plans, both in federal government, and a lot of CEOs have taken already their lead from the backlash against so-called woke policies. Have you done anything? Will you do anything to change your approach to diversity, equity, and equality?
Inclusion. So the way we think about it is we believe that to be effective, our organization needs to reflect the makeup of the customers that we serve. And it would be very myopic to not represent the consumers that we serve. And we serve a very broad and diverse range of consumers. So I think it's good business actually to make sure that the people inside the company understand the consumers that we want to serve and understand their lives, their dreams, their aspirations. So that's not going to go away, and that's good business. The other piece is, I think a lot about future-proofing in this space, both for DEI and sustainability, which is obviously another hot topic. And our responsibility as leaders of this firm who wanted to thrive 50 years from now is to look ahead and make sure that we are prepared to be successful 5, 10 years from now. So a lot of the work that we're doing on these fronts is really about preparing the future. I know from a recruiting standpoint that we need to create an environment where there's a strong sense of belonging, right? I know from a career development standpoint and retention standpoint that we need to create an environment where our teams have a strong sense of belonging. So all that is just good business.
Sure.
To prepare the company, to enable it to thrive today, but also prepare it for the future.
Right. I mean, you're touching on business resilience, which is the topic of the panel that follows this interview. And you've led through COVID, through culture wars that we've talked about, at least obliquely, through political change and so on. I mean, what's the trick there?
Yeah, it's been pretty volatile. It's a few things. One, I would say the clarity of purpose for this company. All right, we know what we represent, we know what role we want to play in this world. The second is a clear set of strategic choices which I think are timeless, ranging, we have 3. Elevate and energize our lifestyle brand, drive the core and expand for more from a product category standpoint, and win in key cities, top 30 cities around the world with our consumer ecosystem. And I think the ability to continue to bring that to life and stay true to it is serving us particularly well. People understand that. And again, not getting distracted by things that could happen here and there. The last 2 things I would call out are, one, diversity of growth drivers. We're not dependent on one market, on one consumer group, on one geography. And then agility, right? And that's a new muscle that we've built through COVID. I don't think people would have described Ralph Lauren as a particularly agile company 10 years ago. But it's pretty clear that to be successful in today's environment, you need to be nimble, you need to be agile. Clear on where you're headed, but agile in terms of how you get there.
Sure. Patrice Louvet, hope you enjoy the rest of Davos. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Andrew.
Hello, and we are back from the discussion with the Ralph Lauren CEO. You heard Patrice Louvet there talking about business resilience a little bit and how Ralph Lauren manages through big shifts. And we're now back with a panel to discuss a little bit in more detail the business resilience challenges that geopolitical, technological, and indeed environmental disruption pose to businesses. We were hoping to be joined by Sandor Jambo from the United Nations Global Compact, but she unfortunately won't be able to be with us. But I'm very happy to have Marco Alberan from TES, Renewable Energy Company, and Julie Isco from Workiva. Julie, just give us a line about what Workiva does before we get started.
Workiva is a global software company, and we provide a platform for companies to transparently report their critical business data so that they can report and disclose with ease and transparency and data accuracy and data integrity. Focus areas is around financial reporting, non-financial and sustainability reporting, and some governance, risk, and compliance. I mean,
Right. And Marco, your one-liner elevator pitch for TES?
TES builds large energy projects, so we're building LNG terminal in Germany to replace Russian gas with US and other forms of natural gas. And we're also making what we call ENG, which not many people yet know what it is, but it will be the fuel of the future. It's electric natural gas. So you turn solar and wind into a product that's exactly like fossil gas. So it has all the advantages of gas. You can store it, you can ship it, you can move it, you can burn it exactly like gas in a boiler, in a heater, in a turbine, but it's made from solar and wind.
So two businesses with very different resilience challenges. But Julie, when you think of a resilient business, your business obviously, what do you think that means for you?
Well, as a CEO of a company, when I think about my largest goals around financial performance and committing to and providing stakeholder objectives and performance, I actually look at resilience as one of my top priorities for the company. And I think about it as not just being organizationally resilient, but thinking about each of the components in the organization being resilient. It's around the functions themselves, but it's the people, it's the culture, it's technology, the platform, market resilience. So the number of components there. On the people side, certainly you need the bench strength. You need to ensure people are skilled for what's to come. I think we think about resilience as future-proofing in a way, or striving to do so. And on the people side, you need to have leadership skills for today's leaders, right? To develop the new leaders coming up through the organization. Certainly, there are cultural, challenges too, but resilience means culture. You need to have your values. You need to align teams with those values. There are strategies. You need to have a strategy that you focus on and align the organization to that culture of learning, culture of innovation, culture of accountability and security and responsibility. So culture is a foundation, and the values, of course, underpin the culture. So there's people, the culture. On the market resilience side, playing in multiple geos, being diverse around where you play, whether it's regional or globally, but also Workiva has a platform, and we've got multiple solutions on capabilities on that platform, a number of them, so that we can be resilient should one of the markets drop for one of our solutions or soften. We're prepared to continue on. And a good example of that is over the last couple of years, one of our markets did soften significantly. We have a solution and capability around capital markets and taking companies through private to public journey, and that market was very hot in 2021, and over the next year or two, it slowed considerably. But we were able to continue to not just grow, but accelerate our growth because we had multiple capabilities around the platform, particularly our sustainability reporting capabilities that during that time had increased with respect to demand and so forth. So resiliency around functions, around people, around culture, around technology, and certainly around your capabilities in your company and in the technology itself and the platform and the way you go to market.
Marco, you've got a slightly different resiliency challenge because obviously you've got things happening on the ground, plant as well as people. How do you think of resilience when you're looking at future-proofing the company against some of this disruption?
I've had the privilege to work first in investment banking at Goldman Sachs, then in very large state companies. Now I'm starting my own companies. And it all comes down to people. Whether you have hard assets, soft assets, it's down to people for me. And we call it, we launched the World Wellbeing Movement. Now that ESG is almost something you should not talk about anymore, but it's time to break ESG down to its basic principles. And so environment is one thing, governance is one thing, but the S of sustainability, people don't really figure that out. And that's what the resilience is making sure the people are doing well in the company. The word company comes from Latin, cum panis. It's people who want to eat bread together. So my job as a CEO, as a co-founder of companies, is to make sure that every one of my employees sees the company as a path to pursuing his highest potential. And when you switch into that mindset, whether it's hardware, software, infrastructure, geopolitics, global projects like the ones that we do, then you create the best teams, the best purpose. And whether you like ESG or you don't like ESG, or you're in the left, you're in the right, or you're in China, or you're in California, people are ultimately profoundly driven by purpose. And that's what I discovered when I moved from a Goldman Sachs culture of private equity into ENI, which is Italy's largest company, state-run, where it's just complete end of the spectrum, opposite side of the spectrum in terms of how you remunerate people, how you fire people, how you treat people. And I was like, how can this like state-run enterprise be as effective, one of the world's best oil and gas companies, competing with kind of US, culture? And I really went into like a profound journey of discovery. I did a TED Talk on this. Like, what motivates people is purpose. It's not salary, it's not the risk of being fired. In fact, if you treat people well, they behave like a jazz band and magic happens. And if you give people a sense of purpose, then you can inspire into that outperformance. So for me, that is resilience. Then we have a bigger theme, which is how does the world survive, where we have 1 billion people in Africa coming to this planet, where you have very little access to energy, where Nigeria will have more people than China by the end of the century. And not many people have traveled to Nigeria, but I have a lot. And you just don't have energy access now. And so they will have 900 million people in Nigeria.
Right.
And Mali and Tanzania. So the good news here is that where you have sunshine, we call it PPWS, put the panels where it's sunny, you can produce energy at 1/5 of the cost of oil. So this is what China has figured out. This is why we're not only doing fossil fuels with LNG and the dash to gas that maybe the US administration will hope to achieve, but we're also looking at the fuel of the future, where you can turn that very cheap solar and wind not only into power for the data centers, but also into gas for heating or for chemicals or for steel.
I want to get further into that, but just to come to the immediate disruption that Davos has been lit up by this week, how do you, Marco, feel your business is ready for this change that you've described, where you've got a sort of baby drill approach from a new Trump administration? Have you been long in the planning of what might happen if a Trump presidency ensues?
Yes, look, I've been 30 years in the energy industry, more or less, and I've been drilling. I drilled in Alaska, I drilled in Siberia, I did a lot of work in Africa. And the oil industry is very well balanced, supply and demand. So supply follows demand. And there's a fundamental shift, as I mentioned, with renewable energy used to cost $1,000, now costs $10 a megawatt hour, and oil went up to $60 a megawatt hour. So policy can only do so much when you have these big disruptions and these big technology arbitrations. Now, China has figured this out, so they will continue to push to continue to lower the cost of energy. And I don't want to become too technical, but energy is vital for everything we do. And doing it properly is vital for the sustainability and survival of our species.
Right.
And the good news is not only that solar and wind cost less where you have sun and wind. Of course, if you're sitting in the north of Germany, when they call it the cold Dunkelflaute. So it's cold weather, you don't have sun, you don't have wind, power prices are 800. So the sunshine, you can produce power at 10, German power prices are 800. So you need to figure out a sustainable way of moving that 10 into where you need it. So the short answer, yes, we have been building our company to be resilient, not necessarily for a Trump or non-Trump administration, but to cater for the energy needs of the future, which is cleaner, cheaper, more abundant, and more resilient.
Right, and yes, sorry, Judy.
So I think it brings up a good point. We often think about resiliency as changing and working around and adapting. It really is oftentimes stay the course, right? You have your goal, your objective, your mission, and it's the values underpinning everything. It is the courage to stay the direction. Of course, taking into account what's going on around you, but it often is resilience. So you could be enduring through some of the changes around you, even if you are going it alone too.
Yes.
So,
I mean, Julie, I was thinking about Workiva's business. Obviously, part of what you've been involved with is very heavily in the sustainability reporting area, and ESG went sort of off the agenda, at least as an abbreviation last year at Davos. That's almost gone further this year. You have a emboldened US administration now wanting to kind of push back against that. Again, how did you prepare for that? Clearly, sustainability, as we've already discussed, is still something that we think should be an imperative.
It's alive and well, yes, and it's a global issue.
Has it affected your business directly?
We don't see the numbers in our demand. Certainly noise, right? There's no question there is noise around ESG, and you see, as Marco's described, changes in the way we, terminology and language and so forth. But again, this is about, sustainability reporting is about identifying risks, surfacing those risks. Mm-hmm. It's about performance, company performance, organizational performance. It's not simply about, you know, the way ESG is put forth today. So it's really, if you want to play on a global stage and you're in the US, you're going to want to disclose or report your sustainability, your non-financial metrics and data. This is not about something happening in the US, and you can see it and feel it here in Davos. Climate is still very much a topic. Sure. Sustainability is still very much a priority. It's a generational movement. And again, risk identification and management, performance, right? It's not about, you know.
So it's a question, arguably, of just shifting the balance without having to say you're preparing to bend rather than break, is just being able to say.
Again, noise. No, it hasn't impacted our business. Companies have been buying for sustainability reporting for years now, and its regulation has not been in place. Right? So they understand what they need to do. They're building out sustainability programs globally, reporting locally in the jurisdictions as needed.
Right. Marco, I think if Sandra were here speaking for the UN Global Compact, she would point out the interconnectedness of lots of risks in the world today. So climate, you know, health, economic crisis, social justice, these are all things that are linked, and some of the ripple effects are not linear. They're not as predictable, perhaps, as of old when there was less of an interconnected world. I just wonder how you go about predicting. Do you run scenario planning to help with resilience? Are you employing geostrategic consultants to look at this kind of thing?
Yes, to all of that. We do predictions, we look forward, we talk to all the experts, we come here to this week and we pick up the noise. I think the energy market is very different. If you look at power, if you look at oil, if you look at gas. Oil is just a global market. No one knows where the oil they're buying comes from, if it's Nigerian oil or US oil. Gas is much more regional. And gas is only consumed in the northern hemisphere. When it's cold in the US, it's cold in China, in Korea, in Europe, in Japan, and no one's really buying gas in the south. So it's a very seasonal, kind of regional commodity. When you look at power, it only travels on average in the world about 40 miles. So it's a very, very, very local thing.
Right.
And this is what people don't get. It's not interconnected at all. We have to make it more interconnected to be able to tap into that cheaper energy.
Yes.
So if we can produce our synthetic methane in Oman, we can send it into Japan, and we're creating new interconnections. Yep. So resilience, if you look at the map of fiber optics, whenever we're in Europe and we watch Netflix, or if Julie and I have a video call next week, that's traveling in a line under the Atlantic Ocean. In your case, it travels across the whole of the US because you're on the West Coast, physically, and then it travels under the ocean. And so the same will happen with energy. We need to create more interconnection, to your point, to create more resilience, to be able to tap into the world. So I think the interconnection can happen via ship, like we're doing with gas, via LNG or via ENG, which is our electric natural gas. It can happen via power cables, but it can also happen via data. And that will really help. And then I think the next step is when AI really kind of takes over, it will be allocating resources which are in abundance. The world has much more than it needs to live very well. And so when you create that infrastructure of interconnectivity and you layer on top of it the work that Julie and her colleagues are doing to really be smarter about how we allocate resources, however many political or geopolitical disruptions you have, we are essentially creating a much healthier, more interconnected world.
Right.
And so that's happening. You can't stop that. It's kind of the force of gravity is pulling us there.
Sure. Julie, perhaps building on that, I'm interested in resiliency, which we sometimes think of as just risk mitigation, but as a competitive advantage, is that the way you think about it?
Absolutely. First, risks people think of as a negative. Typically, it's not always. There's always opportunity there. You want to be informed about the risks. You want to manage the negative aspects that you think will impact you. But I mean, we're talking a lot about it here at Davos, right? AI, generative AI, AGI, ASI. We're moving that direction. Certainly some risks, but I think it's not only about the risk, right? There's opportunity there, and I think both of us sitting here in the roles that we're in have some propensity for risk. We just need to manage those risks. So certainly an opportunity. And I also think sometimes you feel they're in conflict, right? Innovation, for example, is in conflict with, innovation and speed is in conflict with safety, security, responsibility. They're not. In fact, like sustainability fuels performance, going quickly, moving gives opportunity and can fuel the outcomes of some of these things. So again, informed about your risks, understand them and manage them, but there certainly is opportunity.
Sure. I mean, sort of linked to that, we discussed this on the previous panel. Some of the things that I've been hearing, obviously, are businesses saying, this is going to be a volatile time. Clearly, there's a shift happening in the world order here, but that always does present opportunities for businesses. Is that how you feel about it as well?
I think we are driven to find the opportunities for sure. And I think part of resilience is looking for more, in business we call it looking for more TAM, right? Total addressable market, or more opportunity to invest. Again, for resilience, for growth, for performance. I mean, most companies here, the theme right now is growth and performance. And yes, that's part of it. Though you, of course, take risks to go after. When we rolled out our sustainability capabilities, sustainability management, we weren't sure. The definitions were happening, regulations were in place. We took risks, right? Informed risks, learned, understood, and so forth. But again, risk does provide opportunity. It's not always a negative. They go hand in hand.
I mean, Marco, just to come to that, less perhaps on resilience, but I mean, clearly you come from European roots. You've got the European base as the business. Do you see this difference between the U.S. animal spirits in a Trump administration?
I was born in New York City, so I'm half American, half Italian.
Okay.
So I have that struggle.
You immediately got risk mitigation built in.
I have that struggle within me.
Yes.
I think the best panel of the week I was just at this morning with Patrick Pouyanné, the CEO of Total, and Maroš Šefčovič, the Commissioner for Trade of Europe, just debating this very question. And Europe has 450 million people, huge market. In COVID, we led the world out of COVID by doing the whole vaccine procurement. Has huge purchasing power if they get their act together, and really has all the ingredients to succeed. A sentence I really loved from Patrick Pouyanné, which for me is the sentence of the week, is we have a capitalistic model whose values we really like in Europe. But we need to make that model sustainable. And we've put the customers at the center in over-regulating and making the resilience riskier from a cost of energy point of view, from a red tape point of view, from being obsessed about anti-monopolistic attitude. So where we look at Europe now, we have all these pluses. We're sitting right at the middle between China and the US, and you could say we have a model which is a hybrid between those two extremes. But we haven't created that interconnectivity we're talking about. We haven't created the giants that we need. I mean, okay, Total is a giant, but if you look at the banking sector, our banks are much, much smaller than the US banks. And I had State Grid of China as a shareholder in my company when I was running a state-owned Italian company. It's a company with 5 million employees, hundreds of thousands of PhDs, putting billions in R&D. So we can't underestimate what China is actually doing with its might and its power. And I think Europe has this formidable opportunity to be in the middle of these flows with our model, which is an expensive model because we attach to our capitalistic system a whole sustainability of the people. And how we play that to our strength and not take it as a burden is really what Ursula von der Leyen told me and other executives this week. How do we turn this into our advantage by cutting on the red tape, essentially implementing the Draghi recommendations and the Enrico Letta. Now they happen to both be Italian, but
Right.
both sets of recommendations for those who want to read it, they are excellent. And the Commission wants to enact them. And Maros Sefcovic, the Commissioner, wants to do it. And the trade between the US and Europe is 1.6 trillion. And the deficit is only 50 billion. And we can fix that quickly with LNG. We can fix that and increase the resilience, lower the cost of energy, make the administration in the US happy, increase the interconnectedness in Europe. That's why I don't want to bring it back to our business, but we're building Europe's largest LNG terminal.
But you are going to face some disruption if tariffs are imposed, if there's some disruption to trade in LNG, which Trump is already talking about.
Well, they want to export more. So Trump has shifted from an economic analysis to a cash-based analysis on balance. I'm an economist, so I understand the counter-arguments to trade, but I also understand why people's sentiment is, we don't want to run a deficit. If you can export more LNG into Europe, it lowers the cost of gas of households and makes industry more competitive. It can only be good. And we're still burning oil from the Ukraine situation. We're still burning coal. And the more gas you have, the lower is the cost of energy. So if you can tie the security of supply, the sustainability economically, the climate sustainability, and turn this into an opportunity, you create a much more resilient Europe. So this is what I'm working on with the Commission actively, to create a situation where Europe could be buying more LNG, creating kind of a central bank for Europe. I've been talking about this for 20 years with the UK government. Like, you use gas in the winter for heating. You store it underground in the summer and you take it out in the winter for heating. We have all this storage. The world has strategic petroleum reserves, but you don't have a strategic gas reserves. I mean, we've had it after Ukraine for certain countries, an obligation. Thank God the government stepped in, forcing companies to fill it up. But that was an exception. Europe now has the opportunity to create a strategic gas reserve, buy LNG, help the administration settle its trade imbalance or address it. At the same time, you tie it with a climate policy where you do what China's doing, which is helping its own companies build out the supply chain, but you help European companies build out their supply chain. So you say, let's do renewables in Europe, let's do renewables with European manufacturing equipment. So you address trade, you address climate, you address sustainability, and you address industrial policy.
Yes. Julie, Marcus had a chance to talk about some opportunities there that are coming through. What are the opportunities that you foresee in this brave new world for Workiva?
I do think I see a little more willingness to take risks, opportunities, particularly on the technology side, which is my area of emphasis. So I do see a willingness to accept technology. I feel it everywhere at Davos. Technology will provide solutions for us to some of the world's largest and most challenging problems. So I think that's an opportunity for speed and innovation. I will, of course, always go back to doing it responsibly, particularly for us. We have critical data for customers, and we need to take care with that and protect and secure that on our platform, and we do, and we always have. But I do think this appetite for innovation and technology to solve world problems, very challenging world problems, is probably what I see.
And does the shift in regulation towards deregulation affect your business? Obviously, to some extent, reporting is a function of regulation.
Again, and I'll give sustainability reporting as an example. There are always what we call box checkers or compliers, and those that are waiting, for a law to tell them what to do.
Yeah.
But as we talked about, again, sustainability, for example, fuels performance. And businesses today, you hear it again here in Davos, it's growth, it's performance, it's economy and so forth. So for the markets that we play in and the company sizes that we target, they're ahead, right? The train's left the station, and as you know, right?
We're lucky enough to have you on the last show of the last day of the Davos Daily Show, and I've been asking some of our previous guests, including on our last panel, what they think the future is of the World Economic Forum annual summit, which brings us all up here in our snow boots year after year. We seem to be keen to come back. Marco, what do you think is the short-term and maybe medium-term future? Is the World Economic Forum resilient enough to resist a massive change in the global world order?
I happen to know the leadership, and I talk to them about this. They spend a lot of time worrying, as you know, about the present and the midterm and the future. Personally, I must say I always come back with more energy than when I come. Even though we consume a lot of energy, we walk up and down a lot of steps.
I agree with that, yes.
But I end the week more energized than I start the week, and I'm usually a high energy person because of that buzz, because of that news, because of the snippets that you take away. And
that'll keep pulling you back to the...
I think there's a lot of serendipity moments where connections happen here because it's in the air. And that's very, very special, regardless of the topic of the week or the headlines or the election cycle. It's really about creating the human connections.
Right. Julie, will you keep coming back for that?
I certainly will continue to come back, and I think, but I do think there's more controversy around Davos today, I feel, than prior years. And I think it will, you asked, what is the future of it? I think the World Economic Forum and the goals and objectives and why we're all here is collaboration, to solve the world's problems. That's going to exist and continue on. I think we are all passionate about that. You mentioned the, WEF and who is the leadership and so forth, values, mission, purpose. That's conviction, resilience, carrying through, right, as we're talking about. It may have some different forms, but I believe in the purpose. I believe the leadership does as well. I believe it's a resilient organization that will continue on into the future.
If I can just add, because you just inspired me. I mean, I would summarize the purpose, and no one's told me this, but I would summarize the purpose of WEF as almost like a call to action. And it kind of doesn't matter if you go left or you go right or you're an optimist or a pessimist, but if you act and you get stuff done, this is a place of action at the end of the day. Even though there's a lot of talk, but there's consequences, and I think that's very strong.
Okay, well, thank you very much both for joining us for the last panel of the Davos Daily Show. Thank you to our viewers for being with us for 3 days. Just a reminder that you can watch, you will be able to watch on demand any of the sessions that you might have missed or those that you want to revisit, which have some insights that you want to go back to. And we hope we'll be back here with our distinguished guests this time next year for another Davos Daily Show. Again, I'm Andrew Hill, the FT's senior business writer. Thank you for joining us. For over 130 years, the Financial Times has been recognized internationally for its authority, integrity, and accuracy. FT Live builds on this legacy by bringing you global events on business-critical issues.